Thank you. It's indeed sobering after the presentation that we have heard. It's particularly sobering not only because the state of Israel has nuclear weapons and has expressed its willingness to use them under the Samson doctrine, that if things got really, really bad, they don't mind bringing the whole building on top of themselves and their enemies, but also because there is so little attention that is being given to how the rules of international law are being totally disregarded, and a justification is being built in for such disregard of international law. Now, I'm an international lawyer, but beyond that, I am a believer that there should be restrictions on the power of states to just do whatever they want, or whatever is in their interest, or whatever they feel that they are entitled to do, even when they are involved in very serious existential war with their enemies. There have to be rules. There have to be restrictions. We have 194 countries in the world. You can't just have any country feel like it can do whatever it wants whenever it wants. Now, it's true that the international legal system does not have sufficient methods to enforce international law, largely because the United Nations Security Council, which is charged with the power to rein in rogue states or rogue individuals, to impose sanctions, to have unifying for peace resolutions. Unfortunately, the United States, as well as Britain, maintain veto power and has rendered a lot of the provisions of international law ineffective and meaningless when it comes to Israel and the situation in the Middle East. But this is not the only instance in which Israel is flaunting international law openly and introducing its own doctrines in its place. One of these doctrines is the so-called Dahiya Doctrine. Dahiya means neighborhood, and it's a reference to the southern neighborhood of Beirut, which is a largely Shiite neighborhood, which is viewed as being supportive of Hezbollah. Now, during the Lebanon War, the previous Lebanon War, Israel announced the Dahiya Doctrine, namely that the entire neighborhood where Hezbollah has people and supporters and institutions is a legitimate target, and that they reserve the right to go in and utterly destroy al-Dahiya, that anybody in that area is a legitimate target because they are friendly to, or because they have organizations that are associated with, or because they are political supporters of Hezbollah, their enemy, and they are at war with Hezbollah, and therefore anything and everything that's related to Hezbollah can be destroyed. This totally undermines the distinction between combatants and non-combatants, between civilians and the military. It simply says, whenever I am at war, I can destroy anybody who is even related to my enemy. This has actually been used and is being used daily in Gaza, where Hamas is declared to be this evil force, and anybody that can be claimed or accused of being in any way associated with Hamas is legitimate, and we can go in with our superior military destructive power and destroy buildings, organizations, mosques, churches, universities, hospitals, whole neighborhoods, because they can be claimed to be somehow associated with Hamas, who is our sworn enemy. I know that compared to entirely destroying the world, this may be a small point, but it is not. The idea that there needs to be rules and regulations, there needs to be laws, that even in war, even when you start a war, whether it's defensive or offensive, and Israel always claims that its wars are preemptive, defensive, so that even when they start a war, it's supposed to be defensive. But even in a defensive war, there are rules and regulations. When somebody surrenders and lifts the white flag, you cannot shoot them, you cannot kill them. When somebody is captured as a enemy combatant, you cannot torture them, you cannot rape them, you cannot deny them food and medicine and regulation. When you are capturing an area that is occupied, you cannot move your civilians into that area and set up settlements, and you cannot use collective punishment, and you cannot erase the distinction between a combatant and a non-combatant. You must accept the rules of international law. That's the minimum that is required. So I hope that one of the messages that should come out strongly, regardless of where you stand politically on the Israeli-Palestinian issue or any other issues, is that international law needs to be respected. The rules of war needs to be respected. International humanitarian law needs to be respected. Of course, we all want peace. We all want an end to violence and suffering. And of course, nations have their responsibilities and duties to protect their citizens, etc. But we need to have rules. We need to have international law. Would that we work more on peace and conflict resolution than we see these days. But at a minimum, we should oppose clear and blatant violations of international law. Certainly when it comes to committing genocide or having a system of apartheid or having a system that is racist and discriminatory, that should be stopped. We should not allow any state to act with impunity towards others, and anything we can do to strengthen international law and international institutions should be done. That's the 10 minutes that I have. I know there's a lot more that needs to be said. The horrors of what is happening now, continuing horrors in Gaza, in the West Bank, and now moving into Lebanon. It seems to be that there is no end to this craziness and to this madness. Sometimes I don't know what there is left to say anymore. The very fabric of international law and international legality and international morality is being systematically torn to shreds, and people seem to be okay with that.
No, I think that's true, and I really appreciate the work that you've done, Mr. Kuttab, with your organization and the work you've done with Reverend Isaac in recruiting Christian Zionists. I think this has been incredibly important, and some people don't even believe that it's even possible. And I think it would be okay if you wanted to speak a little bit to that before we continue.
Okay. There's Christian Zionism is one of these really nefarious doctrines that are fueling the the fighting and the repression that is taking place. And Christian Zionism is an example of how religion is often used, sometimes cynically, to perpetuate evil and violence. Because I'm a Christian and because I'm very familiar with evangelicals, having grown up in a Christian home, I know that many people who are evangelicals accept Christian Zionism not out of a commitment to its doctrines, but out of a failure to read and understand their own scriptures correctly. Just like people abuse Islam when they go in for ISIS and Al Qaeda and other really false interpretations of Islam. Also, there is false interpretation of Christianity in the case of Christian Zionism. And I have to say that this is where dialogue and education becomes very important. It is not always necessary to fight and kill your enemies. Sometimes you can just sit and talk to people and discuss it with them, show empathy, show understanding, try and understand people in their own terms, and maybe avoid resort to violence. Even in national disputes, violence and war should be the very last thing on your mind. Because even when you're successful in war, you create so much suffering, so much hatred, and so much problems down the line. So whenever it is possible to engage with others, to show a level of empathy and understanding, to try and resolve disputes non-violently, even to struggle non-violently for your goals, that should definitely be something that is encouraged. And that is one of the things that we do continuously in our organization, FOSNA, Friends of Sabil North America. It's a Palestinian liberation theology movement that believes that theology should be a positive, not a negative force, and for the liberation of people and not for their oppression and not for their used to justify racism and even, in our case, genocide.